and thanks for joining me again in my workshop. I'm Tony, still trying to build this tank. So the next step for me is to clean up all the components that I'm going to use during the process of painting, in particular the road wheels and the idler wheel and things like that, and the hubs, because if I don't clean them properly, when I come to prime and paint them, the primer will not key correctly to the surface. It's just the residue left over from the manufacturing process, and it's a simple remedy. It takes a bit of time, but well worth the investment of time. So effectively, all you need is, I think, 2 bowls, one with the solution in, one as a rinsing bowl, a decent pair of gloves, something that's going to protect. I mean, I don't particularly have sensitive skin. I'm lucky that way, but I'm still going to wear them because I don't want to risk it, and I certainly will not be putting I certainly won't be doing this without some kind of eye protection, because if it splashes in your eyes, you could get yourself into all sorts of bother. So I'm ready now. So all I'm going to do is I'm just taking these road wheels, simply letting them soak in the solution for probably about 10 minutes so that the compound starts working. I'll show you in a moment before and after what it looks like after I've gone through the cleaning process, and I'll just leave them soaking in there for a little bit, and then I'll just use a utility scrubbing brush to scrub them up. And once they've been in there and I've scrubbed them, I'll leave them in there to rinse, and then I'll take them off, I'll dry them, I'll shoot a bit of air on them to dry them off, and I'll leave them on the other bench ready for painting. Not going to paint just yet, but I just want to get this done while I've got the solution out. I cleaned the hub, or the main hull of the tank, in the last film, so you've seen the results of that, and certainly handling the metalwork and the tank now is so much better. You don't get that sort of the compound coming off on your hands. So I thought I'd show you an example of before and after. So you've got 2 examples here. These are the hub. This is the hub obviously before it's been cleaned. You can see the residue and the compound dust that's been left over from the manufacturing process, and this is it once it's been cleaned. It's nice and shiny, clean, very smooth to touch. Same with the idler wheel. This is before. You can see the dust, the build up, and then this is it after a simple dip and clean. Nice and shiny and no residue. Same again with the road wheel. These are not too bad, however you do get quite a lot of build up of the residue in this inner rim here and here, and when you come to the one that's been cleaned, you can see that's nice and clean now. So a lot easier and a lot happier with those to paint. Worthwhile investment, and certainly a very wise and a thing I would certainly recommend doing before you even think about painting these. What you don't want to do is end up spending a lot of time painting and then the paint doesn't adhere and starts flaking, and it'll just be a nightmare for you to deal with afterwards. So that's it. So I'm going to carry on with my cleaning process, and then we're going to start doing a little bit more build. Right, so all the parts I want to wash and clean and prep for paint I've done. Didn't take that long actually, and as you can see, they're all come up quite well, looking quite shiny and ready for painting or priming at least. This is the product I used. It's a fairly safe product to use, but I'd still use gloves and possibly wear your goggles when you're using this, just in case it gets in your eyes. But it's not that as it's not as hazardous material. One thing I did notice when I was cleaning these up, there's again part of the manufacturing process, I can see that these holes are a little bit of swarf, as you can see there, pointing here with my small screwdriver. So I think what I've got to do is just make sure that prior to building or assembling the road wheels that I remove all this swarf. I don't want anything getting in the way of the operation of the wheels. So something I'm going to have to do to all of these wheels. I've done most of them, but just thought I'd show you this. You know, nothing major, but again, it's just a personal preference potentially. And then just make sure. So I just want to remove all the swarf. I mean, I'm sure it'll probably be cleaned up when I put the fixing through it. As you can see here, there's some swarf coming out. I'm just going to run that back through just to make sure. What I don't want is anything later on in the build that I regret not doing ahead. I mean, there are more components that I will need to wash and prep prior to painting, but I wanted to get these done while I had the bath of cleaner prepared when I did the hull of the tank. And when I do the wheel assembly, there are other things, hubcaps and the likes of that, which need to be done. I've already done the drive housing, and then you can see all those swarf elements. So I don't want those in the build. I don't want them getting bogged down in paint, and I certainly don't want them to interfere with the mechanics. So I'm going to go now and start the next stage of the build, which will be the drive shaft housing and assembly. But I wanted to just show you this as I think an important stage in the build, and something I'd highly recommend you do prior to even considering priming or painting. Right, so I've gone ahead and assembled one of the drive case units already. It was quite straightforward, and I thought I'd then do the other one in real time so you can follow how I've gone about doing it. Now, I've seen various different ways of doing this on YouTube, and completely different to what Armortek recommend. Armortek, I think, have made it simpler. I think the drive case is different from what I've seen on earlier models. This is now enclosed, and it's just made up of 5 simple components. Now, I've already washed and prepped these, so when I do come to paint, I not have to worry about it. As you can see, the gear mechanism is now installed with the bearings, the spacer, and I have used a dry lube rather than grease as recommended by Armortek. I guess I'm going to follow Armortek. I mean, the builders out there will probably use a standard grease, which I have used in the past, but it can build up over time a bit of grit and potentially, you know, damage some of the fine teeth on this. So with that said, when you get your delivery from Armortek, the gears themselves are very carefully wrapped and beautifully engineered, beautifully done. I mean, I've got to clean this up, but it's a heavy piece of steel, and you can just feel the quality when you handle it. So I'm just gonna, before I do anything with that, I'm just gonna clean that up. Again, I guess these things are packed and stowed long before they get packed off and sent to the end users. And then I'll just simply dry that off. So when I apply the lube, we don't have an issue with that. So, in simple terms, we have the drive case cover unit. We have 2 bearings and a spacer. Now, Armortek recommend, again following this, that you use Loctite to secure the outer face of the ball bearings into place. So I'm just going to follow the same process as I've done on the previous one. I'm not going over the top with the adhesive, just enough to spread that around. Now, the last bearing went in very easily. Knowing my luck, these ones will probably take a bit of a encouragement. Nope, straight off in there. Now I've got a bit of old broom handle that I use. It will just help push that down into position, and I can see by just looking into this, it's in the right location, so it's in there nice and secure. Then the spacer goes in. Again, no problem at all. I'm kind of waiting for the difficult bit to come up. I'm sure there will be along the line, but so far so good. So now I'm just going to Loctite the outer and just use the nozzle to spread that round. So that's that done, and the final bearing to go in. Goes in nice and easy. I can see why they want it Loctited in. So that's it, nice and simple for the assembly of that. The next bit is this. Now I use a dry lube. I've used dry lube on many occasions. It's a really fantastic piece of science, but I don't know enough about the science to explain to you. But anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give this a good old shake. I'm going to take it away from this bench onto my other bench. I've got a towel, so excuse me while I just spray this on. I'm only spraying the teeth and the inner face and outer face. So that's it, sprayed up. I'll just leave that precariously standing there for a moment. Now, what's interesting about this, Armortek recommend that you bond the shaft of that to the inside rim of the bearings, which is tricky because no matter how you do it, whether you put the Loctite on the shaft or on this, it's going to smear along the extent of the shaft. So what I did before is I'll just put a little bit of Loctite on the inside of that. I can see why, because they're in there quite, they snap in quite nicely, but they're not, it wouldn't take a lot to come out. Obviously be very careful not to get any of the Loctite on the actual bearing mechanism itself, and that would be really a bad idea. So now I'm just turning this, so I'm going to do the same on this, use the nozzle to spread that around. Less is more, I think, is sometimes with this kind of adhesive. Okay, so that's that. Now I'm just simply going to pick up the gear and I'm going to just slide that in, and it will go in. And there it is. But now I need to clean that shaft off. I don't want any adhesive on that. And these proprietary wipes are excellent for this kind of job. And then once that glue, still a little bit of residue on there, but that will peel off nicely. As you can see, it's in there and it's turning beautifully. So they're now both ready well, they will be ready shortly to fix to the actual tank. So I'm going to leave that one out there just for a moment, and the one I've previously assembled we'll start to install. So obviously all these fixings will need thread locker. Now I'm going to do it the way I do it, and which I've done previously for models. So instead of me individually doing each one, I'm going to put a surplus amount of Loctite on just a bit of waste plastic, and then when I'm ready I'll just dip and turn. So now I've got the Loctite on the end of that, rather than trying to physically mess around with the individual. So try not to touch the adhesive or the lube. Now going to position the very first one of these. I'm not going to do this up too tight until I've got a few more in. Just want to get it, so just hold it there. You can feel when it positions itself into the hole. So I've gone ahead and assembled the first of 8 of this particular type of wheel, really just to see what was involved and how complicated it was going to be, so I can kind of judge how long it's going to take me to do the remainder of these 8 and the other 8, the ones that run the inside of these particular wheels. Quite straightforward really, just fiddly with the amount of bolts that are required. And as you begin to sort of put the rear wheel on the back here, it becomes quite awkward with how you tighten these bolts up. But I'll show you that in my next session. So all of these parts I cleaned, as you know, before I built this wheel, and I must admit that's helped tremendously. It's helped just in handling the products. I've got no residue on my hands. They feel really smooth and a real pleasure to work with. So definitely worth cleaning. Even if you're not going to paint straight away, clean them before you start working with them. The other, I suppose, two things to note really. I haven't changed the Armortek way of doing these brass couplings. I've seen on YouTube some people bend them up on the ends here to again, I guess, to replicate the real tank, where you know these are formed to stop the big nuts from coming undone with all the vibrations. I'm not going to do that here. I quite like the look of that. I think it's a personal preference, and I'm going with the Armortek instructions. Not only that, everything's been fully thread locked, so I'm very confident that that's going to hold through its sort of, you know, hopefully many hours of operational use. And the only other thing is there's a nut on this hub cap here. I've left this loose for now. I'll take it off so you can see the bearing inside of that. So in there, the two one this side, one the other side. But again, I'll show you that on my next session. But this little nut, which again at this stage I don't really know what it's for. I think it's just a feature on the real tank. I don't think it's actually got any real practicality to it. Possibly to use as a large wrench to be able to undo the hub. So I guess that will be the functionality of it. But anyway, this nut here took me ages to find. It's not actually on any of the Armortek packing lists, but it is labelled on one of the bags. So I can't remember which bag it's in, but it's one of the bags, and you will find it, but just be patient. So anyway, that was that. So really pleased with that. Again, everything beautifully engineered by Armortek. Everything just goes together beautifully. We did the drive case assembly today as well, which I really enjoyed. Very simple, and again, beautifully engineered gearing mechanism in there. Everything's so smooth, just works as it is. As you know, I used dry lube on that, as recommended by Armortek. Although I guess you can use grease. I've opted to go dry lube. And the only thing is, I've just masked this up just so I don't forget. I don't paint this when I do come to painting it. So Obviously my next step, I guess, would be to complete the build of these particular wheels and the other 8 sets of wheels. And once I got to that stage, I'm probably going to start thinking about prepping it for painting. So just sort of giving it another wipe down and then going ahead, priming it and top coating it. And I think the real thing here is, if you are building a tank, I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am, but set yourself a realistic target for what you're going to achieve in a day. Don't be silly, you know, because otherwise you're going to get frustrated with it and get the ump with it. I'm not doing that. I'm setting myself a very clear target. Now today, I've had lots of things going on today, friends popping around, that kind of thing. It's a Saturday, you know, lots of family things going on, but I guess I've spent about 6 hours out here, and that 6 hours was cleaning up the wheels, assembling the drive case parts and attaching them to the tank, and then just having a sample go at one of these wheels. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Music on in the background, plenty of cups of tea, coffee, and so I'm not rushing it, and I'm taking my time. And that's my advice to you. Set yourself something sensible, and then you'll be happy. If you try and do too much and you don't get it done, that's when you start losing, just losing a bit of patience with it. Don't do that. It's well worth the effort. So that's about it for today's session. I hope you've liked it, and thanks again for joining me. Again, I'm Tony, still trying to build this tank, and I'll see you soon.